may not say a word, but his energy remains in your space. It lingers quietly in the background, woven into the corners of your daily routine. You think you're fine, that you've moved on. But then there's a moment, quiet, unassuming, where a song plays, a memory flashes, or you find yourself checking your phone for no reason. That's when it hits you. You feel him without any physical sign. No text, no call, no appearance. And yet his presence, though unseen, continues to influence your emotions. This is not your imagination. It's not weakness. It's a signal, a reflection of emotional residue that has yet to be cleared from your mind and your nervous system. This emotional attachment works like a magnetic field. It's not always something you see, but something you sense. And when a bond was strong, when the connection was real, that energy doesn't just vanish overnight. Thoughts are energy. Feelings are frequency. So when two people have emotionally invested in each other, the connection doesn't always die when the words stop. It's simply transformed. And often it becomes heavier when one person is left uncertain, waiting or hoping for the other to make a move. That's why, even after he disappears, there's still this invisible pull. But here's the real dilemma. While his energy might linger, so does your doubt. You begin to question everything. Did I say too much? Did I do too little? Should I have waited? Should I reach out now? You start rewriting the past in your head. You overanalyze every conversation, every emoji, every moment. You try to decode his silence. You assign meaning to his social media activity. You wonder if that quote he posted was meant for you. And slowly, your confidence begins to shrink. Not because of what he's done, but because of the meaning you continue to assign to it. And this is where emotional damage begins. Not from his silence, but from your interpretation of it. You internalize his absence as your inadequacy. That's the dangerous part. It's not just that he's quiet. It's that you believe his silence is a message that something is wrong with you. You begin to doubt your worth. You start to think you weren't enough. And that doubt, when left unchecked, becomes the breeding ground for negative emotions. Sadness, resentment, regret, confusion, even obsession. The mind is a powerful storyteller. It can build mountains out of a moment. And when you're emotionally attached, your mind becomes addicted to scenarios. You create conversations that never happened. You anticipate reactions to texts you never sent. You live in the world of what if instead of the world of what is. And this emotional chaos begins to wear down your spirit. You become trapped not by him, but by your own thoughts about him. And someone is emotionally tied to you, you may feel their presence even in their absence. But the real trap is letting that feeling control your behavior. Many people don't understand how easily the mind can sabotage your progress. That invisible connection, though real, can blur your clarity and keep you stuck in patterns that delay your healing. That's why people keep checking their phone, refreshing his page, hoping for a sign. It's not love, it's emotional dependency disguised as hope. And hope without self-awareness becomes a prison. You start asking yourself questions you think will bring clarity. Does he still care? Is he thinking about me? Is he waiting for me to reach out? But none of these questions can be answered with certainty. What's worse, every time you think about him without resolution, you open emotional wounds. Your nervous system remains activated. You stay in fight or flight. And your body doesn't understand that he's not a threat. It only understands that you're anxious, unsettled, and emotionally unsafe. And what do most people do when they feel emotionally unsafe? They act impulsively. They text, they call, they chase. Not because they've made a conscious decision, but because their emotions hijack their logic. And after reaching out, they often feel worse, especially if the response is cold, delayed, or indifferent. That's the punishment of emotional impulsiveness. You trade your peace for a temporary illusion of control. The irony is, the more you feel him in your space, the more tempted you are to reach out. But the more tempted you are, the more it shows that you haven't yet healed the parts of yourself that are looking for validation from someone who isn't giving it freely. That doesn't mean he's bad. It doesn't mean you're weak. It simply means your healing is incomplete. And that's okay. But your awareness of this pattern is the first step to breaking it. The energy that lingers after a man pulls away is real, but it's not a sign you should act. It's a mirror. It reflects what still needs closure within yourself. If his presence is strong even in his absence, it may be because you're still emotionally open to him. And that openness becomes a vulnerability. Until you learn to regulate your own emotions, you'll keep mistaking energetic residue for divine timing. And you'll keep delaying your own peace, waiting for a message that may never come. He's silent, yet you know he's watching. Not with his words, not with direct communication, but in quiet, indirect ways that only someone who has felt a connection would notice. There's a stillness on the surface, but a subtle pull underneath. You sense it in the way he views your stories without missing a beat. You feel it in the way mutual friends mention him in passing, dropping his name like it's still relevant, and it is to you. Because while he's not saying anything, he's still present in your awareness, and deep down, a part of you believes he's keeping tabs, waiting for the right moment to re-enter your life. But in truth, he might not be watching you as intently as you think. What's really happening is that your focus on him has become so amplified that you interpret silence as suspense and distance as desire. You've become so emotionally tied to the idea of him that you assign meaning to the smallest signs: a liked post, a view, a subtle status update. Your mind magnifies these micro-adventures into signals. But are they signals? Or are they projections? Are you seeing what is, or are you seeing what your emotional attachment wants you to see? This is where negative feelings take root. Not in his silence, but in your internal dialogue about what that silence might mean. Your mind becomes a detective trying to solve a case that doesn't need solving. You reread old messages. You analyze his online behavior. You try to decipher meaning from meaningless details. It's exhausting, it's draining, and it's a trap. Because while you're busy watching him watch you, you're losing sight of yourself. That's the real danger. You stop observing your own growth, your own progress, your own emotional needs. You stop checking in with how you feel and instead check in with how he might be feeling. You give up control of your internal state and surrender it to the unknown intentions of someone who is choosing silence. And this silence becomes louder than anything else in your life. It becomes a noise in your head that drowns out your own clarity. This obsessive attention to him stems from emotional addiction. You're addicted to the potential of what could happen if he breaks the silence. But that potential becomes a fantasy that distracts you from the reality of what's not happening. And in that gap between fantasy and reality, negative emotions thrive. You feel confused. You feel rejected. You feel unworthy. Not because of anything he's doing, but because of the story your mind is writing in his absence. In this space of uncertainty, your self-esteem takes the hit. You begin to feel invisible, irrelevant, replaceable. But all of that stems from external focus. You've made someone else's behavior the compass of your self-worth. You've tied your peace to a man who may or may not be paying attention. And in doing so, you've stopped paying attention to the one person who needs you most, yourself. Healing doesn't begin when he reaches out. Healing begins when you stop waiting for him to, when you redirect your energy inward, when you stop using his silence as a mirror for your value, when you stop checking your notifications hoping to see his name, because every time you look for him and don't find him, you reinforce a belief that you're not wanted. And that belief carves deep grooves in your emotional wiring, making it harder to feel secure, even when love does eventually return to your life. It's important to realize that the mind is an illusionist. It can take a lack of evidence and still convince you of a powerful story. It can use his silence to build an entire narrative filled with longing, pain, hope, and doubt. But the truth is, what hurts most isn't his silence. It's the emotional abandonment you inflict on yourself when you prioritize his presence over your own peace. There is a deeper layer to this. Sometimes you're not watching him because you miss him. You're watching him because you're afraid he's moved on without you. And that fear ignites insecurity. That insecurity makes you compare. You compare yourself to the people he follows, the women who like his posts, the ones who might be in his orbit now. And every time you do that, you strip away a little more of your emotional stability, because comparison is a poison that multiplies in silence. When someone watches without speaking, it creates a false sense of connection. You feel like he's still there. But is he? Or is it just the imprint of the past lingering in your nervous system? Silence is not always suspense. Watching is not always waiting. You must ground yourself in what is, not what you wish it was. Because when you live in the hope of someone else's return, you pause your own evolution. You live on hope. Every time you check for signs, every time you wonder what he's thinking, you delay the process of emotional detachment. You keep feeding the hope that he might just say something, anything, that proves he still cares. But caring that isn't expressed through action is irrelevant to your growth. He might be watching, or he might not. But the more important question is, why does that still matter so much to you? You can't grow if you're still begging for closure through observation. You can't move forward if you're stuck in the loop of waiting to be noticed. Let him watch if he is. But don't watch yourself disappear while he does nothing. Don't make someone else's silence louder than your own voice. Reclaim your attention. Reclaim your focus, because your healing doesn't depend on whether he's looking at you. It depends on whether you are finally looking at yourself. You wake up with the weight of yesterday still sitting on your chest. There's no message from him, no call, no apology, just silence. A void that echoes louder with each passing hour. And yet deep inside, you still feel like he's waiting for you to make the first move. But then comes the inner war. Do you break the silence? Do you reach out? Or do you continue pretending you're fine? This moment is heavy because it's not just about a man. It's about what reaching out symbolizes. It's about ego. It's about vulnerability. It's about fear. But beneath all of that, it's about pain. The kind that lingers long after the person has gone. Negative emotions don't just come from what others do to us. They come from what we allow ourselves to believe in moments of emotional weakness. When someone goes silent, your mind starts to spiral. You begin to wonder what you did wrong, what you could have said differently, why things changed so quickly. But those aren't questions seeking truth. They're questions rooted in self-blame. And self-blame is the most subtle yet corrosive form of self-abuse. You sit there replaying memories, trying to pinpoint the exact moment he began to drift, all while ignoring the fact that he chose silence, not you. Still, the idea that he's waiting for you to fix it starts to grow. You think maybe he's testing you, maybe he's hurting too, maybe he's hoping you swallow your pride first. And so you think about texting, just one message, one attempt. But here's where the real battle begins. Not between you and him, but between your strength and your desperation. Because when you reach out from a place of pain, what you're really doing is asking for relief, not resolution. You're not looking for clarity, you're seeking comfort. And comfort that depends on another person's response is never secure. This is how emotional dependency begins to build itself a home in your heart. You start believing that the only way to feel better is if he does something to make you feel better. And the moment you place your emotional balance in the hands of someone who's already withdrawn, you've set yourself up to suffer. You've told yourself that healing can't happen unless he participates in it. And that's a dangerous belief because it gives all your power away. Even worse, when you don't hear back after reaching out, the spiral deepens. The shame kicks in. The regret surfaces. You reread what you wrote. You wonder if it was too much, too soon, too needy, and suddenly your attempt to reconnect has turned into a weapon against yourself. You beat yourself up for hoping, for trying, for feeling too much. And in that moment, your pain doesn't come from him ignoring you. It comes from you rejecting yourself for needing someone who wasn't there. This cycle of emotional self-betrayal is where most people stay stuck. You don't just mourn the person, you mourn the version of yourself that believed in something more. And that hurts. Because even when logic tells you he may not care, your heart still wants to believe he does. So you justify his silence. You make excuses for his behavior. You tell yourself he's just afraid, just confused, just waiting for the right time. But sometimes the hardest truth is the one that frees you. He might not be waiting at all. And that realization should not break you, it should wake you. Because the need for someone else to respond shouldn't be the reason you feel worthy. You must recognize that your value isn't determined by who texts back. It's not defined by who stays or who leaves. It's not about whether someone validates your pain. It's about whether you validate your own experiences, your own feelings, your own needs. And when you finally stop waiting for someone else to acknowledge your worth, something miraculous happens. You begin to acknowledge it yourself. That's where the healing begins. Not in getting a reply, but in realizing you no longer need one. Not in him breaking the silence, but in you breaking the habit of attaching your peace to someone else's behavior. Because emotional freedom comes when you stop trying to control outcomes and start mastering your response to them. It's the discipline of not reacting. It's the wisdom of knowing that silence isn't always an invitation. It can be a boundary, one that you're allowed to respect even if it hurts. When you stop reaching out to fill the void, you make space for something greater to enter. Clarity. Clarity about who you are when no one's watching. Clarity about what you truly need in a connection. Clarity about the patterns that keep you emotionally stuck. And with that clarity comes choice. The power to step back, not because you're being passive, but because you're choosing peace over chaos. You're choosing self-worth over self-sacrifice. You're choosing to trust that if something or someone is truly aligned with your growth, it won't require you to chase, beg, or break yourself just to be seen. There's a strength that comes from restraint, a deep confidence that grows when you stop explaining yourself to people who never asked, when you stop proving your value to someone who didn't see it the first time, when you stop extending your heart to someone who has yet to extend even their time. In those moments of painful stillness, your true power is forged. not by doing more, but by letting go of the need to do anything at all. There's a voice inside you that whispers at the quietest moments, right before you fall asleep, right after you open your eyes. It says, maybe he still cares. It reminds you of the look in his eyes, the softness in his voice, the way he once held your hand like it was something sacred. That voice isn't just nostalgia. It's hope clinging to the remnants of a connection you once believed in. But what you must realize is this: that voice, though it may sound like truth, often speaks through the filter of longing. It tells you what you want to hear, not what is. And so you begin to read between silences, looking for meaning in things that are not being said. You start convincing yourself that his absence isn't rejection, it's hesitation. That maybe he's too afraid to reach out. That maybe he's testing you, wondering if you'll still make the effort. And once you buy into that belief, your emotions become tied to a waiting game. You begin checking your phone more often. You read his last message again and again. You rationalize his behavior. Maybe he's just busy. Maybe he's unsure of how to start the conversation. Maybe he's trying to protect his pride. You begin constructing a narrative where you are the one he's secretly thinking about, hoping for, watching from a distance. But there is a danger in romanticizing silence. There is a pain in making someone's inaction feel like hidden affection. You see, when you assign emotional weight to someone's absence, you're giving your power to uncertainty. You're investing energy into a version of the situation that isn't grounded in reality, but in emotional fantasy. This isn't love, it's survival. It's your heart trying to make sense of the ache by building stories around it. And while it's human to do so, it's also how we prolong our suffering. Because the truth is, people who want to reach out usually do. People who care find a way. They don't leave you drowning in doubt, wondering what you meant to them. When someone keeps you in confusion, it's rarely love, it's avoidance. And yet, even knowing this, your mind keeps replaying moments. You remember that time he opened up to you, when he shared something raw, when he seemed genuinely connected. That memory becomes your proof that he hasn't really let go. But what you must understand is that memories are not momentum. Just because something was once beautiful does not mean it's still alive. You cannot live in the echoes of affection. You cannot find peace by anchoring your hope in someone's silence. And yet, this is exactly what happens when we allow emotional dependency to cloud our judgment. It begins with one unanswered message, then two, then a few days of no communication, and instead of moving forward, you freeze. You stay emotionally stuck in a place where every day feels like waiting for permission to feel better. You put your healing on hold, just in case he reaches out tomorrow. But what you don't realize is that waiting like this is a silent kind of suffering. It's a slow erosion of your self-worth. This emotional limbo turns into a pattern. One where you keep checking signs, looking for clues that he's still emotionally tied to you. You watch his online activity, you see his post. You wonder if the lyrics he shared are about you. You analyze everything and get nothing. And every time you convince yourself that he's thinking of you, you delay your own healing. Because the truth is, hope is only helpful when it's aligned with reality. Hope that ignores facts becomes a prison. It keeps you attached to someone who's already detached from you. And then comes the guilt. You feel guilty for still caring. You feel ashamed for hoping. You beat yourself up for not being strong enough to just let go. But this isn't about weakness. It's about habit. It's about emotional muscle memory. You love deeply and now your heart is trying to reattach itself to something familiar. even if it's harmful. You're not broken, you're human. But the question you must start asking is not whether he's thinking of you, but whether thinking of him is serving your healing. There's a false comfort in believing someone is waiting for you to reach out, because that belief gives you an illusion of control. It makes you think that maybe if you just say the right thing, things will go back to how they were. But healing isn't about going back. It's about going forward, even when your heart isn't ready. Even when every part of you wants to revisit the past, you must teach yourself how to remain in the present, because in the present you have choices. In the present you can begin again. And waiting for someone who isn't reaching back out to you is like standing at a closed door hoping it will open just because you're standing there long enough. But time doesn't open doors. Effort does. Clarity does. Mutual desire does. And when that isn't present, the best thing you can do is walk away, not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing not to be held hostage by unspoken hopes. Because you deserve more than uncertainty. You deserve peace. And peace rarely lives in the same place as confusion. It lives in truth. It lives in acceptance. It lives in the decision to reclaim your emotional energy from places it no longer belongs. When you find yourself constantly reflecting on someone who's no longer part of your everyday reality, it can become easy to blur the lines between intuition and obsession. There is a fine, almost invisible thread that separates gut feelings from emotionally fueled projections. When your heart is tied to someone and you are emotionally unbalanced, your mind begins to create stories that sound like intuition but are in truth only the echoes of your desire trying to find justification. You tell yourself, I feel like he's thinking about me, and maybe he is. But maybe, just maybe, this feeling is more about your emotional hunger than his actual presence in your energy. People tend to believe their intuition without questioning its source. But not all intuition is rooted in truth. Some of it is born from trauma. Some of it is born from repetition. If you've been conditioned to associate silence with suspense and absence with hidden meaning, then your gut feeling might just be an emotional illusion, not a spiritual insight. You start confusing anxiety with intuition, mistaking the tightness in your chest as a sign from the universe instead of what it really is. Your own nervous system reacting to unprocessed emotions. When we are emotionally attached, our mind begins to paint reality through the lens of desire. We selectively pick signs to support what we want to believe. You scroll past a quote he might have liked. You remember a shared song. You see numbers that remind you of his birthday, and suddenly you feel like the universe is trying to speak. But the question is, are these signs, or are they your own longing looking for meaning? Emotional dependency plays a dangerous game. It masquerades as intuition. It whispers, he's coming back. It convinces you to wait, to stall your growth, to hold your breath for someone who hasn't reached for you in days or weeks. And the more you stay in that space, the more distorted your reality becomes. You stop seeing the world for what it is and start seeing it through the lens of emotional survival. You become hyper-attuned to every small shift in energy, every possible signal. But this obsession doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of being wrong. Fear of facing the truth that maybe he's not coming back. And maybe he's not thinking about you at all. And that truth is too heavy. So your mind chooses the comfort of illusion. What you have to understand is that true intuition is calm. It's grounded. It doesn't create panic or desperation. It doesn't make you spiral in thoughts. It speaks once with clarity, and it doesn't beg for attention. When your intuition is loud, repetitive, and obsessive, it's not intuition. It's emotional addiction. An emotional addiction is just another way of saying you're trapped in a loop that feeds off uncertainty, hoping that the next day will bring the message you've been waiting for. You must learn to separate the whispers of truth from the screams of your emotions. This is not easy, especially when you're deeply connected to someone. Your brain forms patterns. Your heart remembers how he made you feel. Your body recalls the safety of his presence. And when all of that is gone, your subconscious looks for ways to recreate it. That's when you begin dreaming about him. That's when you swear you feel his energy. That's when your mind tells you he's about to text. And when he doesn't, you don't question the intuition, you question yourself. You think, maybe I messed up. Maybe I waited too long. Maybe I should reach out. And you go in circles, never allowing yourself the grace to break free from this internal maze. This illusion becomes your emotional home. You live in maybe. You settle into soon. You find comfort in, I know he's thinking about me. But comfort isn't healing. And emotional dependency isn't love. It's fear dressed in hope. It's a survival mechanism. When you've spent enough time in emotional limbo, you begin to normalize the idea that love should be confusing, that affection should feel like guesswork, but love isn't a puzzle. Connection isn't a riddle. If someone is thinking about you truly and intentionally, they'll make it known. They won't rely on your intuition to carry the relationship forward. They will show up not as a coincidence, not as a sign, but as a conscious choice. The work here isn't about forgetting him. It's about liberating yourself from the illusions that keep you emotionally stuck. It's about understanding that your intuition might be compromised by your longing. It's about recognizing that not every feeling is a prophecy. Some feelings are just emotional residue, leftover hopes, unhealed wounds, and when you mistake those for intuition, you end up trapped in emotional limbo, chasing shadows. Real intuition comes after you've done the work, after you've calmed the chaos, after you've stripped away your ego and stood in truth. And most importantly, real intuition doesn't hurt. It doesn't make you doubt your worth. It doesn't keep you waiting. If what you call intuition is making you feel anxious, unworthy, or unloved, it's time to question it. It's time to come home to yourself. Because the greatest clarity you'll ever receive doesn't come from someone else thinking about you. It comes from you thinking clearly, free from the emotional fog of dependency, masquerading as insight. Silence is one of the most powerful communication tools, yet it is often misunderstood. When someone who once communicated with you regularly suddenly goes silent, your mind immediately starts crafting narratives to explain the gap. You begin to wonder, is he waiting for me to reach out? Did I do something wrong? Is he testing me? The silence doesn't just leave a void in your external world. It echoes loudly within your emotional space. But what most people fail to realize is that silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's the presence of intention. And in many cases, it's the clearest message you'll ever receive. Silence forces you to sit with your thoughts. And when you're emotionally invested, that silence can feel unbearable. It becomes a mirror reflecting everything you don't want to confront. Your fears, your insecurities, your unhealed wounds. You start to believe that if you just break the silence, you'll find relief. You tell yourself that one message will give you clarity, that a small hey will restart everything. But that's the trap, because what you're really chasing isn't connection, it's closure. And closure is rarely found in someone else's words. It's found in your decision to accept what isn't being said. When a man goes silent, especially after consistent interaction, it can trigger deep emotional confusion. It scratches the surface of your self-worth. You start measuring your value based on his absence instead of your essence. You wonder why you weren't enough to keep him interested. You question if your silence is pushing him away, if you're playing the game wrong, if he's waiting for you to make the move. But silence is not a game of chess. It's a strategy of emotional protection or disinterest. Either way, if someone truly wants you in their life, you won't have to decode their silence. You'll see their effort in action. There's also a common illusion that silence creates suspense, and in that suspense, people often romanticize the waiting. You start to fantasize that maybe he's thinking of you every day. Maybe he's just too shy. Maybe he's trying to see if you care enough to reach out first. These assumptions may bring temporary comfort, but they rob you of clarity. Silence is not a test you are supposed to pass. It's often a statement you are supposed to understand. And sometimes his silence doesn't mean he's thinking about you. It means he's thinking about everything but you. And that's a truth few are ready to accept. But silence doesn't only come from others. It also comes from within. When you are emotionally consumed by someone else's actions or inactions, you silence yourself. You stop hearing your own intuition. You stop trusting your own voice. You begin to shrink your needs in hopes that if you remain quiet enough, patient enough, or nice enough, he'll return. But this internal silence is even more dangerous. It creates a void where your power should be. It causes you to mute your standards, to betray your own boundaries, to become emotionally paralyzed, waiting for someone to validate your worth with a reply. You have to understand that silence is not always a pause. Sometimes it's a period. And waiting in silence doesn't always produce answers. Often it deepens your attachment to uncertainty. And the longer you stay in that uncertainty, the more your identity becomes intertwined with the outcome. You stop being present. You start performing mental gymnastics to figure out the best timing, the right words, or the perfect excuse to reach out. All the while, you're disconnecting from the most important relationship you have, the one with yourself. The most painful silence is not the one he gives you. It's the one you give yourself. When you ignore your worth, your wisdom, and your needs, you've been taught that silence is passive, but it's not. Silence is active energy. It speaks. It chooses. It declares. When someone is silent, they are still communicating. The absence of effort is still a form of effort. The lack of clarity is still a clear choice. And more often than not, when someone goes silent, they are revealing exactly how much or how little you matter in their current world. Many people cling to silence in the hope that it means he's reflecting or missing you. And yes, sometimes people do use silence to process. But if processing becomes prolonged absence without accountability, that's not reflection. That's avoidance. And when you convince yourself that his silence is sacred space, you may be excusing emotional neglect. You become addicted to the idea that he's coming back. And this addiction feeds on every hour he doesn't say a word. You begin to read into timelines, look for patterns, and analyze his last post or story like it holds hidden clues to his heart. But silence should be measured not just by what is missing, but by what it creates inside of you. If it breeds peace, you're aligned. If it breeds confusion, you're out of sync with your truth. Silence should never become the soil in which your self-doubt grows. If someone can go days, weeks, or months without checking on you, then that silence says more than any message ever could. And you have the power to interpret it not through fantasy, but through reality. Not through hope, but through healing. The truth is, people make time for who they want to make time for. They reach out to who they want to talk to. They show up for the relationships that matter to them. So if you find yourself constantly waiting in silence, analyzing the pauses, and wondering if he's waiting for you to make the move, then you have to pause and ask yourself, why are you holding on to someone who lets go so easily? Silence is not a code you need to crack, it's a message you need to hear. And your response to that message will either free you or keep you in emotional captivity. The choice, no matter how painful, is always yours.